Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview. I am sitting right now in one of the oldest churches in America, but definitely the oldest in Pennsylvania specifically. We are in the beautiful city of Philadelphia, where a lot of American history takes place. And right now, I am with Jeanette, who knows a lot about this church we're at, and she's going to help us give us a little bit of breakdown of the history. Jeanette, if you want to introduce yourself to start, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm Jeanette Ware. I'm the historian of Gloria Dei, and I have been here all my life. My family has been part of this church since 1821.
Awesome. 1821.
Yes, my great-great-grandfather was baptized in the same baptismal font as I was.
So that baptismal font back there is the same one from 1820s?
It's from 1700s.
1700s. How many things in this church are like that old? Like, is a lot of this stuff
The walls. Basically, the walls are that old, yeah.
Wow.
The balconies were put on in 1845 at a cost of $500. They were trying to decide whether to build a cathedral at the other end of the property or to put the balconies in, and so $500 were spent, and they put the balconies in. Now you couldn't get the drawings for $500.
That's crazy. How old's the organ?
The organ is a 1903 Hook Hastings Tracker organ.
Oh my
And you
word.
heard it this morning. It's
beautiful.
We have an organist that really makes that instrument sing.
And is the stained glass and some of the glass artwork,
The stained glass was put in 1845 when they put the balconies in.
You do know your history. This is really great. This is awesome. But awesome. This is great. This is pretty incredible. Just how much history is in this room, in this church. Like when I first showed up, I was like, this is a beautiful historic site. You walk in, it's just very, I don't know, it's just reminiscent. Like makes you go back. And speaking of going back, this church was started in 1677. Am I correct?
There was services held on this property. This building was begun in 1698 and completed in 1700. Okay. But our first church dates back to Tinicum Island in 1646.
So the service goes back to 1646?
So our church technically goes back to 1646. September the 4th it was consecrated down in Tinicum.
That's incredible.
And then it moved up to this property in 1677 in a blockhouse that would have been right outside our south door.
I'm assuming that's no longer around?
That's no longer around. It's long gone.
So how did the church come to start? Do you kind of have an idea of how the origins came about?
How the what?
How the church originated. What was kind of the people behind it, or was it a settlement?
They came from Sweden, and their minister came in 1642, mm-hmm. and he started the church. By the time, a couple years to build it. Mm-hmm. And then it was Swedish Lutheran until 1845. 1845, we became an Episcopal church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would like to really jump into that at some point. But I know in between there's a lot of like early American history that takes place. Were there some like key historical figures that would have been in this area or involved with this church at any point?
You have two. Betsy Ross was married here to Joseph Ashbourne. And Benjamin Franklin put lightning rods on our church, and we still have some of those lightning rods.
Really? Benjamin Franklin?
Right. He was very good friends with Nicholas Collen, who was our last Swedish missionary. And there's a famous painting of Franklin on his deathbed, and in the center of it is a clergyman, and that's Collen.
Awesome. That's incredible. And who was the other person again you mentioned?
Betsy Ross.
Betsy Ross. For people who may not be as familiar with that name.
Betsy Ross, the flag.
The flag. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. That's incredible. So those two key figures, and those would be the main ones that people would know of? Or?
That would be, yes, the main ones that people would know.
Awesome.
Alexander Wilson is another one. He's the father of anthology. He's buried out in our graveyard.
Are there other historical figures buried here, or is it just that they may have interacted with it?
John Douglas, which was an aide de camp to Washington, is buried out there.
Wow.
So.
It's just so much like American history. I'm sure if I'm having historical buffs watching this right now, it's probably like pretty crazy. But you said at some point it became a Episcopal
Right.
Episcopal Church.
Episcopal Church. In 1845, we joined the Diocese of Pennsylvania. Collen, which was our last Swedish missionary, toward the end of his term here, he was using the Anglican prayer book. He was using Anglican assistance. So it was just a normal thing for us to to go into the Anglican Church.
To make that transition.
Right.
And what would be do you know kind of the differences between Lutheran and Episcopal? What would be the major differences that would have, from an identity standpoint?
Swedish Lutheran is more like the Episcopal Church. German Lutheran is different. It's more or less in the government of it.
Okay. And then from that point forward, what other history has this church sort of experienced since that point? Anything that stands out or comes to mind?
Of importance. Well, one thing that happened in 1944 was there was a great fire right outside over on Washington Avenue, 150 feet from the church, basically. And it was just through an act of God that the wind was blowing south, otherwise our church would not be here. And if you walk around the graveyard, you can see some of those tombs that were destroyed by the bricks falling from the soap factory that caught fire.
Yeah. And like talking about kind of like the surrounding area and the graveyard and stuff, how much of this property, what are some of these other buildings? When I came here, I saw that there was like a few other buildings outside of this church. When did they came to be? How are they involved with the church at all, the property?
Our church has 5 acres. The church, which was built in 1700. We have the rectory, which was built in the 1830s. The next building past that is our parish hall that was built in the 1860s as a Sunday school building. The next building is our sexton's house, and that was built in the 1730s. And our newest building is all the way at the other end of the walkway, and that was built in the late 1960s.
1960s is the newest building.
Yeah.
That's incredible. There's an active effort, I assume, then to keep this place more historical?
We are a National Historic Landmark.
So people can actually come here and like visit and stuff. I saw people were like walking their dogs outside. So it's kind of like almost like a park to a certain extent.
Right. And it's very peaceful. You've got I-95 at one end and you have Columbus Boulevard on the other end of us. And the other thing, during the Revolutionary War, the British took over the church and they used it as a hospital. And it took quite a few years for the church to be restored. But in the meantime, the congregation continued to meet in different people's homes. So that's how we can say that if not the oldest, we're one of the oldest congregations in the United States in continuous use.
Because yeah, that way. That's amazing. I think those are most of the questions I've had as far as some of the history of the church, unless there's something else that comes to your mind that you think would be interesting to mention.
Can you think of anything else? Huh? Jenny Lynn sang from our balcony when she was on tour with P.T. Barnum.
I'm unfamiliar with who Jenny Lynn is.
Jenny Lynn was the Swedish Nightingale, and she toured with P.T. Barnum. There's a movie out about Barnum, and she's in it. So the person I would have loved to have met if he was alive would have been Nicholas Collen, our last Swedish missionary. He wrote a book called Remarkable Occurrences, and he spoke about how the sailors, which were right out here, would come at the ungodly hour of 9 o'clock at night when the shutters were drawn and the candles were extinguished to be married, and half of them were too much into their cups to even know what they were doing. And he would explain about the different the temperatures and the climate. There was a time when, in I think it was 1704, Reverend Sandell wrote that October the 10th they had a hurricane, but then October the 18th they had a snowstorm. So within 8 days, the weather had changed so drastically. And it was interesting reading the different things that the clergy would write, because they would explain about the weather, about the people, and and reading Colleen's explanations about people and their death and stuff. Like one lady was in a rolling chair, but she was always smiling. So that meant she was in a wheelchair most of her life. Yeah. But she was always happy, Or someone died from drinking cold water. Well, the well was next to the privy, so the water was polluted, so if you didn't boil the water, but you're reading those different things, you don't think of that today,
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially since I think there'd be a lot of people out there who actually wouldn't know who Nicholas Collen.
Yes.
Most people wouldn't actually know who that is, and being able to take the time to delve into it, I think would be very fascinating for people because it's like completely new.
Right, because he was very much into the flora and the fauna, and into the weather, and into medicine, and he was very much ahead of his time. He was also one of the patent judges that President Jefferson had appointed.
President Jefferson?
Yes.
Wow.
So it was, and he was one of the founders on the board of the University of Pennsylvania and the Philosophical Society of Philadelphia.
This person has accomplished a lot with their life.
Yes.
Suddenly starts to contemplate what I am doing with my life.
He was here for 45 years.
Only 45 years?
Yes.
And he got all that done?
Right, and also what he did was he married a lot of couples. He married like 3,000 couples in his time, which averaged out was like 84 couples a year. And the one day that I was transcribing the records, and he had 20 weddings, and I said, what did they do? The first couple come down, he'd say, I now pronounce you, and then go next, or they, how did they do that 20 couples get married in one day,
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. You said transcribing the records. Is that something you do here actively?
What I did was I computerized our church records. They're in the old books and the old handwriting, which a lot of people have difficulty reading. They've also been scanned now for the colonial churches of Philadelphia. So you can go online and see some of our records.
Okay, I'll have to keep that in mind. Well, thank you, Jeanette, for sharing some of this church history with us. It was very enjoyable for me to learn here. It's also very enjoyable for me to actually be here and to witness it myself. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.